I saved a man's life. I did everything right. I followed every protocol. But when it was over, my boss looked me in the eyes and told me I didn't belong in that room. My name is Vanessa Palmer, and I've been a nurse for 8 years. I work at a mid-sized hospital in Austin, Texas, but I grew up in a small town in Tennessee where my grandmother taught me that hard work and compassion could open any door. I moved to Austin chasing better opportunities, better pay, a chance to grow. The city felt alive with its music scene, its warm evenings, and streets lined with food trucks and live oak trees. I loved the energy. I threw myself into my work at Memorial Grace Hospital, a place known for its busy emergency department and demanding standards. My shifts were long, often 12 hours or more, filled with the constant rhythm of beeping monitors, rushing footsteps, and the weight of life and death decisions. I was good at my job. I knew I was. But there was always this feeling, this quiet knowing, that I had to prove myself twice as much as everyone else. Because I'm a Black woman in a field that doesn't always see us, that doesn't always value us. And on the night everything changed, that truth became impossible to ignore. If this story already got your attention, subscribe now, because what's coming next will surprise you even more. It was a Thursday night in late September. The air outside was still thick with heat, even though the sun had set hours ago. Inside the hospital, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in that cold, clinical glow. I was working the night shift in the ICU, and it had been one of those nights where you barely had time to breathe. We'd already dealt with 2 traumas, a post-op complication, and a patient in respiratory distress. My feet ached. My scrubs clung to my back from sweat. But I kept moving because that's what you do. Around 11:30, the code alert went off. Room 214, cardiac arrest. I was the closest. I didn't think. I just ran. When I got there, the patient, a man in his mid-50s with graying hair and a wedding ring on his left hand, was unresponsive. No pulse, no breathing. His monitor flatlined with that piercing, unbroken tone that makes your blood run cold. I immediately started chest compressions, calling out for the crash cart. 2 other nurses rushed in behind me. I was in control. I had done this before. I knew what to do. We got the defibrillator ready. I called the shocks. We administered epinephrine. I kept compressions going, counting in my head, feeling his ribs flex under my palms. And then, after what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 4 minutes, his heart started again. The monitor beeped. A rhythm. We had him back. Thank you for staying with me so far. That means you felt what I felt when I lived through all this. Subscribe and turn on the bell, because everything is about to change. The room was still buzzing with adrenaline when Dr. Richard Carmichael walked in. He was the head of our department, a man in his early 60s with silver hair, expensive shoes, and a reputation for being brilliant but cold. He had been in a meeting when the code was called, so he arrived late. He looked around the room, taking in the scene. The patient stabilizing, the equipment scattered, me standing at the center of it all, still catching my breath, my hands trembling slightly from the surge of adrenaline. And then, he said it. His voice was calm, almost casual, but the words cut through me like a blade. You don't belong in this room. I froze. I thought I'd misheard him, but the way everyone else went silent told me I hadn't. I looked at him, confused, waiting for him to explain. He didn't. He just stared at me with this cold, dismissive look like I was an inconvenience, like I had done something wrong. I tried to speak. I said, I was first on the scene. I initiated the code. We got him back. He interrupted me. You exceeded your scope. You should have waited for a physician. I felt my throat tighten. My eyes started to burn. I wanted to scream that I had just saved a man's life, that every second counts in a code, that I had done exactly what I was trained to do. But I couldn't get the words out. I looked around at the other nurses, the respiratory therapist, hoping someone would say something. No one did. They just looked away. Now I want to know, where are you watching from? Write it in the comments. It's amazing to see people from all over connecting through stories like this. I left that room feeling smaller than I ever had in my life. I went to the staff locker room, sat on the bench, and let myself cry. Not because I doubted my skills. I knew I had done the right thing. I cried because I realized that no matter how good I was, no matter how hard I worked, there would always be people who saw me as less than, who saw my blackness, my gender, before they saw my competence. The next few days were a blur. I went through the motions, but I felt like a ghost. I avoided eye contact with Dr. Carmichael. I kept my head down. I started questioning everything. Maybe he was right. Maybe I had overstepped. Maybe I should have waited. But then I talked to some of the nurses I trusted. One of them, an older woman named Carol, who'd been at the hospital for 20 years, pulled me aside during a break. She told me this wasn't the first time Dr. Carmichael had done something like this. She said he had a pattern of belittling nurses, especially women of color. She told me about a Latina nurse who had filed a complaint 3 years ago and was quietly pushed out of the department. Another who was passed over for promotions repeatedly despite glowing reviews. I started paying attention. I started noticing noticing things I had ignored before. The way he spoke over us in meetings, the way he dismissed our clinical observations, the way he never learned some of our names. I realized I wasn't alone, and I realized that staying silent wasn't just hurting me, it was hurting everyone who came after me. I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this go. I documented everything. I wrote down exactly what happened that night, with timestamps, witness names, and the patient outcome. I reached out to the nurses' union and explained the situation. They told me I had grounds for a formal complaint, but they also warned me. They said hospitals protect their doctors, especially the ones with seniority and reputation. They said I could face retaliation. I could be isolated. I could even lose my job. I didn't care. Or maybe I did care, but I cared more about doing what was right. I filed the complaint. Within a week, I started to feel the consequences. Suddenly, I was being assigned the worst shifts. I was left out of meetings. Some of the nurses who used to chat with me in the break room started avoiding me. I heard whispers. People said I was causing trouble, that I was trying to ruin a good doctor's career over nothing. It hurt. God, it hurt. But I kept going, because I knew that if I backed down, nothing would change. And then something unexpected happened. A resident doctor, Dr. Sophie Lin, reached out to me. She asked if we could talk privately. We met at a coffee shop a few blocks from the hospital. She was nervous, fidgeting with her cup, looking around like she was afraid someone might see us. And then she told me her story. Dr. Lin said that Dr. Carmichael had harassed her for months. He made demeaning comments about her accent, implied she only got into medical school because of affirmative action, and took credit for her work in front of attendings. She had been too afraid to say anything because he had power over her evaluations, her future. But watching me stand up gave her courage. She said she would testify. She said she would go on record, and she wasn't the only one. Over the next 2 weeks, more people came forward. Nurses, techs, even a few patients who had witnessed his behavior. It was like a dam had broken. All these voices that had been silenced, all these experiences that had been buried, suddenly came flooding out. The hospital had no choice but to open a formal investigation. I had to sit through interviews, review boards, and endless questioning. It was exhausting. It was humiliating at times, but I kept reminding myself why I was doing this, not just for me, for every nurse who had ever been told they didn't belong, for every person who had been made to feel invisible in their own workplace. And slowly, the truth started to come out. Security footage showed me leading the code. Patient records confirmed the outcome. Testimonies piled up, painting a clear picture of Dr. Carmichael's toxic behavior. If this part moved you, imagine what's still to come. Subscribe now and turn on the bell so you don't miss the resolution of this story. The next chapter will touch your heart in a special way. The hospital administration tried to control the narrative. They offered me a settlement, money, a promotion to a different unit, a transfer to another hospital in the network with a raise. They wanted me to sign an NDA and walk away quietly. I refused. I told them I didn't want their money. I wanted accountability. I wanted policies that protected nurses. I wanted mandatory training on respect and equity. I wanted a transparent reporting system so that what happened to me, to Dr. Lin, to all those others, could never happen again. They weren't happy about it, but by that point, the story had started to leak. Local news picked it up. Nursing organizations began paying attention. The hospital couldn't afford the bad publicity. Dr. Carmichael was suspended pending further review, and eventually, after weeks of mounting pressure, he was quietly let go. He didn't fight it. He just disappeared. Some people said he took a position at a private practice out of state. I heard he tried to frame it as retirement. I didn't care where he went. I just cared that he couldn't hurt anyone else. But the real victory wasn't his departure. It was what came after. The hospital implemented new protocols. They created an anonymous reporting system. They mandated bias training for all staff, especially leadership. They established a committee to review complaints that included nurse representation. Now you understand why this story isn't just a report, but a lesson in faith and courage. So before you continue, subscribe to the channel, because the ending will give you chills and renew your hope. The weeks following Dr. Carmichael's suspension were strange. Some people treated me like a hero. Others treated me like a troublemaker. I tried not to care either way. I just kept showing up for my shifts, doing my job, taking care of my patients. But something had shifted inside me. I felt stronger, more certain. I had stood up for myself and for others, and I had survived. More than that, I had made a difference. I started getting messages from nurses all over the country, people who had read about the case online, who had their own stories of discrimination and disrespect. They thanked me for speaking up. They told me I had inspired them to file their own complaints, to demand better treatment, to stop accepting the unacceptable. That's when I realized the true impact of what had happened. It wasn't just about me and Dr. Carmichael. It was about a culture that had existed for too long, a culture that allowed brilliant, compassionate, hardworking nurses to be treated as less than then, to be silenced, to be invisible. And now, that culture was starting to crack. I also started speaking at nursing conferences and community events. I talked about my experience, about the importance of standing up, about the need for systemic change in healthcare. It was terrifying at first, but every time I shared my story, I saw recognition in people's eyes. I saw tears, I saw anger, and I saw hope. If this story touched you in any way, show it by subscribing now. Every subscription helps spread more faith, more love, and more real stories that transform lives. Looking back now, months later, I can see everything more clearly. That night in room 214 changed my life, not because of what Dr. Carmichael said, but because of what I chose to do afterward. I could have stayed silent. I could have convinced myself it wasn't worth the fight. I could have let fear win, but I didn't. And because of that, I'm not the same person I was before. I'm stronger, I'm more aware, and I'm more committed than ever to using my voice. The patient I saved that night, the man with the graying hair and the wedding ring, he recovered fully. His wife came to thank me a few weeks later. She didn't know about the drama that had followed. She just knew that I had saved her husband's life. She hugged me and cried and told me I was an angel. I told her I was just doing my job, but the truth is, I was doing more than that. I was proving that I belonged. Not because someone gave me permission, but because I earned it with my skill, my dedication, and my refusal to be erased. I still work at Memorial Grace Hospital. I still walk those same halls, past the same rooms, under the same fluorescent lights. But now, when I walk with my head up, because I know my worth and I know that I belong. This story ends here, but its message lives on. Subscribe now and turn on the bell, so you don't miss any of the upcoming stories of faith, miracles, and overcoming that we've prepared for you.